Alright YouTube, so one of the big stories lately, of course, is how Pope Zinger is going to step down. His name is Benedict, but I'm going to call him Zinger because he's a piece of crap human being. As evidenced by the fact that during his time, and Kitty's with me of course, interrupting the video, during his time before he was Pope, he was the leader of a council that was charged with looking into cases of priest sex abuse. And he was instrumental in moving these priests around, these pedophile priests who were raping little children of both genders. Of course, the little boys get more attention, and of course the stereotype is that priests, bugger little boys. It was little girls too. They're rapist priests. They're priests that do other terrible things. It's rife within the church. And people ask, well, why is this? Why are all of these problems emerging? And some people say, well, most of these charges are false and they're just trying to make the church look bad. My feeling is there are probably a lot more cases than we'll ever know about, that it's actually underreported, and that what you see here, and this isn't just Catholicism, it has nothing to do with any specific religion. It has to do with the very simple principle that most people are familiar with but don't really understand when they look at stories like this, that power tends to corrupt. We see it in government, we see it with the police, we see it with bureaucratic organizations, and we certainly see it to an even greater extent than with any other group within religion. You see this with the imams and the rabbis, you see it with the priests and the pope, and you see it with the cardinals, and you see it with pastors, especially in mega churches. You always have these problems. Because even if you have one benevolent individual leading such an organization, you have the proclivity towards corruption among other members which have office and position within one of these groups. Of course, the Catholic Church has been linked to the mafia, and that's no secret. That's fairly well understood that there have been mafia ties to certain individuals within the church, but more famously, of course, is simply the sex abuse. Now, my thought on Zinger is this. He says he's resigning due to old age and due to poor mental and physical health, saying, well, I'm getting old, I said I'd step down if I felt that I couldn't perform my duties as Pope. Apparently, even though he's the chosen of God, he just suddenly quits and doesn't carry it out till the day he's put in the grave, a cold, shallow grave, preferably out in the middle of nowhere where no one will remember him. Of course, he'll be given an elaborate funeral, which he doesn't deserve, but that's what they choose to spend their money on. It's more important to have gold crosses and, inch-thick bulletproof glass than it is to help orphans. And of course, with such figures as Mother Teresa chaining the mentally ill to their beds to starve to death, so that they would crucify the flesh and thus gain the afterlife, who Reagan really loved, by the way, Mother Teresa, and she did such things. It's all basically a circle suck at this point. It's absolute nonsense. Zinger again, doesn't deserve the office, and I think that he's stepping down not because he's old, he's mentally feeble, he's physically feeble, he's having, seems to have no problems moving around. He seems to have no problems delivering liturgies. He seems to have no deep-seated impediments of any kind. Of course, it could be that he is just signing off due to these defects that he's hiding from the public, but I think we would have seen some evidence of those being the case. I think he's signing off of this job and going into retirement because there's a gigantic tidal wave of scandal that's about to hit the church. Could have to do with, as some people in the Italian media are saying, gay prostitutes. Could have to do with child sex abuse, the mafia. It could have to do with any of dozens of different things. Or it could have something to do with multiple things on any short list that could be associated with the church. It reeks of corruption. Power has corrupted the Catholic Church. Of course, you can look back through the church history and you can say, what has the Catholic Church done for the last few centuries, and what was it doing in its infancy? Oh, well, it was killing people who didn't agree with them. killing the scientists, killing the philosophers, killing the evolutionists, doing anything that they could to stand in the way of science and political progress. Of course, sitting by idly during World War II as people were being killed and saying, oh, well, we're going to keep a hands-off situation here because, Italy's government has become fascist, so we'll save our own necks and not, raise a battle cry and try to get anyone involved. The church is nonsense, but again, let me point out, this isn't just a Catholic problem. This goes to the root of power itself as a corruptive influence on individuals. We say corrupt in a morally subjective sense rather than an absolutist sense because it changes from group to group. The power that's invested in any large religion, specifically the large ones, not so much smaller or newer religions, which still can be corrupt and certainly can be insane, but not to the same degree. When you have 1 billion people waiting for your every word, and you have cardinals and bishops and priests and monks and nuns gathered around you day and night waiting on your beck and call, and you have golden crosses and limousines and first-class flight to wherever you happen to want to go, and you have 100,000 people in a crowd listening to every word you say as though it were the word of God himself, you have the problem of the temptation and the corruption that goes along with that. Now, it could be that the Pope himself is gay or a pedophile or something like that. This is possible too. It's something that the Catholic apologetics, which by the way pour onto news stories to say that anyone who's anti-Catholic is obviously, bigoted or racist or something against Italians or Irish people. These people are delusional. They don't understand that there's the very real possibility that Bent-a-Dick and or Rat Zinger himself has some sort of moral flaw that he's being forced to step down for. It's possible that that's the case. It's more likely that it's related to the sex abuse scandal. The most likely reason he's actually stepping down is he knows shit's going to hit the fan. And he wants to retire, not suffer in a jail cell for having done something terribly wrong before or during the time when he was Pope. This is likely. It's less likely that he's leaving due to age or mental confusion. I would give it a fairly good likelihood that this is tied to the sex abuse scandal because, again, Ratzinger was on the head of the group that was created to investigate these claims and to react to them appropriately. He was on the head of that group in the 1990s when Pope John Paul was in power. So, if shit hits the fan, for anything that happened during that period, who's responsible? It's Ratzinger. There you have it. There you have the reason why he's probably stepping down. And you see all these Catholics, and it's almost like maybe they were paying people just to be in a crowd there. What individual would be proud about standing outside St. Peter's Basilica and waving and cheering and saying, oh God, it's the Pope, it's the next in line to the throne of God and Jesus himself? Who would be proud about doing that, knowing that the entire religious organization is completely overshadowed by scandal and has been for over a decade? That these sex abuse claims go back decades and decades. They go back to beyond the mid-1900s. They go back to the 1930s and 40s. Some of the earliest claims do. This isn't a new thing. This isn't like, oh, well, leftists entered the church and thus pedophilia was born, and before that everything was great. No, actually, if you look back, well before that happened, and there were any left-leaning individuals in these sort of edifices and orifices in some cases, you have these problems. And you look back at the bloody and violent history of Catholicism itself, and you can see why there's a problem with the church, because it evolved essentially just to control kingdoms. It evolved essentially to control the lay people. It was the biggest, most powerful governing influence on medieval Europe. You have these relatively small, kind of defenseless in some cases, kingdoms and tribal regions. You've got Muslims knocking on the door. You've got to have someone to sort of regulate behavior. Of course, the church made sure to say, well, knights aren't allowed to go and carry off maidens to rape them on Sundays or, Christmas. You have these insane moral laws that were created by this group that originally probably meant well, but caused great genocide and pain and suffering in the process. It's a leap of the imagination, it's a leap of faith, to believe that the Catholic Church went from being a violent, bloody, power-hungry, greed-mongering organization to suddenly, in the last 100 years or so, being this great benevolent force for mankind. Especially when you see on the news constantly that priests are getting in trouble for raping little kids, and that they've got ties to organized crime, and that and this is alleged, I haven't seen a proper source, so I'll just throw it out there and say it's alleged, that Ratzinger actually talked to the president of Italy to try to get immunity from any charges stemming from priest sex abuse. Why would he have done that unless he thought that there was something to be gained by asking for such immunity from such charges? It boggles the mind that anybody can look at any organized religion and actually take it seriously. I'm always... it's hard for me to react to these people. I often consider them trolls when they come out online and they say these weird things about praising Allah, praising Jesus, glory to the Pope and the motherland, or anything like that. I always have to wonder in my mind whether they're trolls or whether they're actually religious, because the two are so close together, it's impossible to tell them apart. It really is. It's difficult to tell the difference between an honest-to-goodness apologetic or fundamentalist or evangelical and a troll who's pretending to be one of those things just to piss you off because they know that you're not religious. It's very difficult. There's actually a phenomenon explaining that. I can't remember the exact name at the moment, but there's actually some sort of theory or law regarding that fact, that it is impossible in many cases to tell the difference. I don't take the Catholic Church seriously. Now, of course, I was never a Catholic. I've been around Catholics, I've talked to Catholics. I was a Protestant Christian before. I never really had a problem with Catholics when I was a Christian, but afterwards, of course, and that was before most of the sex abuse scandals also, you've got to realize that until the mid to late 1990s, most people thought about church and they thought, oh, wonderful place, you can have a picnic, you can commune with Jesus. We'll have, a square dance afterwards and maybe a little bingo. We'll raise some money for the poor. We'll have our food shelf. Everyone's great. Look at how, the nuns and the priests. That's what people thought of church as being back in the mid-90s when I was a kid. Now, of course, it's, I'll go to church, but I wonder if I'm going to get raped up the ass while doing it. Things have changed drastically. Interestingly, there's a prophecy that the Pope after Ratzinger will be Petrus or Manus and usher in the age of the Antichrist and govern his flock through many tribulations. Well, in a way, I guess you could say that's almost coming true already, because it looks like they're in a sticky situation and he hasn't even left yet. And I hope that that's the case, because they need to have some challenge to their power and authority. It would be nice if all religious people just abandoned ship from all organized religion and just said, well, if we believe in a God, we'll be deists, and we'll stop believing in all of these nonsense pastors and priests that constantly lie to people and take your money and use it for their own monetary gain. What the hell are you listening to these people for? If there is a God, you've got just as much access as any priest or pope. It doesn't make sense, especially when most of these individuals seem to be spending their time hiring male escorts or having sex with little children. It really doesn't make a lot of sense. And Ratzinger, glad he's out. If there's a miracle, then we might see a pope that's actually progressively minded and doesn't care if you happen to be gay or, use condoms. It's unlikely to happen, but it's possible. So that's a little bit about priest sex abuse, the Pope stepping down, the Vatican in general, organized religion. It's just an issue that brings a lot of what the fuck to your mind. It really doesn't make a lot of sense that people are worshipping these individuals as though they were actually God's heirs, when it's clear from their behavior, no,